The old folks warned about these woods. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices trembling with the weight of ancient fears. The forest, they said, was alive with secrets, its shadows hiding more than just the absence of light. Whispered tales of shadows that moved too fast, of eyes that watched from the darkness. These were not mere stories to scare children but warnings passed down through generations, each word a thread in a tapestry of caution. They spoke of a crimson thread, a ribbon of fate woven through the trees, leading unsuspecting souls astray. This thread, they said, was a marker, a sign that the forest had chosen its next victim. It was a lure, a trap set by the ancient spirits that dwelled within. But young minds eager for adventure seldom heed the warnings of their elders. They see the world as a playground, each danger a challenge to be conquered. The forest, with its dark allure, was no different. And so it was, on a night choked by fog and fear, that three friends ventured into the heart of darkness. The air was thick with mist, each breath a struggle, each step a journey into the unknown. They were young, filled with the arrogance of youth, their laughter echoing through the ancient trees. The forest seemed to swallow their mirth, turning it into something eerie, something that didn't quite belong. There was Liam, the bold one, always pushing the limits. His bravery was a mask, hiding the fear that gnawed at the edges of his mind. He led the way, his steps confident, his heart pounding. Emily, the skeptic, her sharp wit masking a growing unease. She questioned everything, her mind a fortress of logic, but even she could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. And then there was Daniel, quiet and observant, the first to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way the air grew heavy, the silence broken only by the rustling of unseen things. His senses were heightened, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. As twilight painted the sky in hues of blood and bruise, they stumbled upon it. A single thread, crimson red, tied around the base of a gnarled oak. It was as if the forest itself had bled, leaving a trail for them to follow. It stood out against the decaying browns and greens of the forest floor, a splash of color in a monochrome world. The thread seemed to pulse with a life of its own, beckoning them deeper into the woods. A chill snaked down Daniel's spine. He could feel the weight of the forest's gaze upon him, each step a struggle against the urge to turn back. He had heard the stories, the whispers of the crimson thread, a harbinger of ill fortune, a lure for the unwary. The tales spoke of those who followed the thread, never to return, their fates sealed by the forest's ancient magic. As he stared at the thread, fear took root in his heart, its tendrils wrapping around his resolve. "Don't be ridiculous," Emily scoffed, her voice a touch too high, betraying her own growing apprehension. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strained, almost forced. Her eyes darted around the dimly lit forest, searching for any sign of movement. "It's just a piece of string, probably kids messing around," she added, trying to sound more confident. But the words felt hollow, even to her. The string lay there, innocuous yet somehow ominous, its crimson hue stark against the forest floor. But even as she spoke, she couldn't shake off the feeling of unseen eyes watching them, the sense of being observed, judged. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees whispering secrets in a language she couldn't understand. Liam, ever the daredevil, reached out and plucked the thread. His fingers brushed against it, and he felt a strange sensation, like a jolt of electricity running through his veins. It felt strangely warm, pulsing with a faint, unsettling energy. He held it up, watching as it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The thread felt alive, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. "See, nothing to it," he declared, but the bravado in his voice rang hollow in the stillness of the woods. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, betraying the fear he tried so hard to mask. As he stuffed the thread into his pocket, a low growl echoed through the trees. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was an animalistic sound, primal, hungry, the kind of sound that sent shivers down your spine and made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by a shared sense of dread that settled upon them like a shroud. They exchanged nervous glances, each one silently questioning the wisdom of their adventure. The forest, once a place of adventure, had transformed into something sinister, something alive and malevolent. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare them. "Maybe we should head back," Daniel suggested, his voice tight with apprehension. He glanced around, his eyes wide with fear, as if expecting something to leap out at them from the shadows. But Liam, his bravado now fueled by a strange, almost manic energy, refused. He shook his head, a wild look in his eyes. "No way," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "We have to see where this leads." He was determined to see where the thread led, convinced it would lead them to something extraordinary. His steps were purposeful, each one echoing with a sense of destiny. Emily, torn between her skepticism and the growing terror that gnawed at her insides, reluctantly agreed. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's go." They pressed on, deeper into the darkening woods, the crimson thread a silent, sinister guide. The forest seemed to grow darker with each step, the air thick with an unspoken tension. The thread led them onward, winding through the trees like a serpent, its glow a beacon in the encroaching darkness. They followed it, their hearts pounding in unison, each one wondering what awaited them at the end of the crimson thread. Night fell like a suffocating blanket, swallowing the last rays of light. The fog thickened, swirling around their feet, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The air grew colder, biting at their skin, seeping into their bones. Fear, sharp and cold, gnawed at the edges of their courage. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves sounded unnaturally loud, amplified by their heightened senses. They were hopelessly lost now, their initial confidence replaced by a raw, primal fear. The trees, once majestic sentinels, now loomed over them like grotesque, twisted figures, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The forest had become a labyrinth, a maze designed to trap them within its suffocating embrace. "This was a mistake," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "We should never have come here." Liam, his face pale and drawn, didn't answer. His eyes, wide and unnaturally bright, darted back and forth as if searching for something, or perhaps someone, in the deepening shadows. He clutched the crimson thread in his pocket, a lifeline in a sea of darkness. As the night wore on, the forest seemed to press in on them, the air thickening, becoming almost impossible to breathe. The fog was so dense that it felt like a living entity, wrapping around them, suffocating them with its cold, clammy embrace. Every step they took seemed to echo in the silence, the sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The trees, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes, watched them with silent malice. Each branch seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers ready to ensnare them. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and twisted wood, a place where the natural world had gone horribly wrong. The crimson thread, once a vibrant red, was now a dull, almost black color, pulsating with a faint, sickening heat. It was as if the thread itself was alive, a sinister lifeline that connected them to the malevolent heart of the forest. The thread seemed to pulse in time with their own heartbeats, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Liam's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He talked to himself in hushed, frantic whispers, his eyes darting around as if pursued by unseen demons. His once confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a frantic, almost manic energy. He seemed to be unraveling, his mind fraying at the edges as the forest closed in around them. He would stop abruptly, convinced he had heard something, his hand hovering near the hunting knife he always carried. The knife was his only comfort, a small piece of steel against the overwhelming darkness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent him into a state of heightened alert, his senses on edge. The once cocky young man was gone, replaced by a hollow shell, his mind slowly unraveling in the face of the unknown terror that gripped him. His eyes, once bright with confidence, were now dull and haunted, reflecting the fear that gnawed at his soul. The forest had taken its toll on him, breaking him down piece by piece. "Liam, snap out of it," Emily hissed, shaking him roughly. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the fog like a knife. She could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hands trembled. She needed him to stay strong, to fight against the madness that threatened to consume them both. "You're losing it. It's just the woods. It's just our imagination." She tried to reassure him, her voice trembling slightly. But even as she spoke, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that gripped her own heart. The forest seemed to whisper to her, its dark energy seeping into her mind, filling her with a sense of impending doom. But even as she spoke, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that gripped her own heart. The forest was alive, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to seep into their very souls, twisting their perceptions, playing tricks on their minds. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a warning of the horrors that lay just out of sight. The forest was alive, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to seep into their very souls, twisting their perceptions, playing tricks on their minds. It was as if the forest itself was a living, breathing entity, feeding off their fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. They were trapped in a nightmare, a twisted reality where the line between the real and the imagined blurred, leaving them questioning their own sanity.